My fiancé's wealthy family took one look at my kind, simply dressed grandmother and assumed she was the help. They mocked her and treated her like staff in their own kitchen. I eventually couldn't stay silent and stood up for her. But little did I know, a crisis was about to expose who she truly was when the professional chef hired for the event recognized her. This is a story about how appearances deceive and how real class can't be bought. Before we get into it, tell me, which city are you watching from today? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for daily stories. Now, let's head to that unforgettable Thanksgiving dinner. Nathan, my fiancé, called it the final boss battle. After dating for over a year, he had carefully kept me away from his two intimidating aunts, Beatrice and Cynthia, the wealthy, powerful women who ruled the family with sharp tongues and stricter opinions. This dinner would be my ultimate test. The day before, Nathan phoned me in a panic. "Just be yourself, Amelia," he said, then immediately launched into a list of ways not to be myself. "Don't say your parents are retired teachers. Just say they're in education. Avoid talking about your animal shelter volunteering. Maybe discuss stocks instead. And please," he begged, "wear the designer dress my mother gave you, not one of your vintage ones." I hung up, uneasy. The person he wanted me to be felt like a stranger, but I loved him, so I agreed to play along. There was one issue: my grandparents. I was their main caregiver, and they meant everything to me. Leaving them alone on Thanksgiving wasn't an option. After much persuasion, Nathan's family reluctantly agreed they could come. Evelyn and Samuel, my grandparents, were the opposite of his family: humble, genuine, and rich in spirit, not money. My grandmother Evelyn was the best cook I knew, able to turn simple ingredients into magic, but she cared nothing for fashion. She preferred soft cardigans and practical shoes. I knew instantly she'd be judged. The moment we arrived at their imposing mansion, my fears were confirmed. Beatrice and Cynthia greeted us with icy smiles. Scanning my grandparents' modest clothes, they gushed over Nathan, gave me a cold air kiss, and shook my grandfather's hand briskly. Then their eyes landed on my grandmother. "And you must be Amelia's grandmother," Beatrice said, her voice thick with fake sweetness. She didn't take her coat, only gestured vaguely down the hallway. "The kitchen's that way if you'd like to get comfortable." The insult was blunt. She had taken one look at my grandmother's simple dress and decided she was staff. My grandmother, ever graceful, didn't flinch. "Thank you, dear. A busy kitchen is where I feel most at home," she said kindly, walking off with a smile. I was mortified, but before I could react, Cynthia looped her arm through mine and led me into the formal living room, leaving my grandfather to join the men in the study. For the next hour, I sat through a thinly veiled interrogation about my background, career, and future. It felt like being examined under a microscope. I was so focused on surviving the conversation that I didn't notice what was happening in the kitchen. When I finally excused myself, I took a detour there and froze. The place was bustling with a catering team, and right in the middle was my grandmother, not resting, but wearing an apron, quietly peeling a mountain of potatoes. Beatrice and Cynthia were treating her like a servant. "Be a dear and chop these onions," Cynthia said without even glancing at her. "And be careful with that platter," Beatrice added. "It's antique Limoges, porcelain, worth more than your car." My grandmother simply nodded, calm as ever, though I saw the hurt flicker in her eyes. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. The years I had quietly tolerated their snobbery were one thing, but watching them demean the woman I respected most was another. I walked in with a polite smile. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" Beatrice asked sharply. "Guests are in the other room." "I came to help my grandmother," I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. I tied an apron around my waist and joined her. Beatrice muttered to Cynthia under her breath, "The quality of hired help these days. Now they bring family into the kitchen. I met her gaze head on. She's not the help, I said firmly. She's my grandmother and your guest. You'll speak to her with respect. The kitchen fell silent. The caterers froze. The aunts stared at me, stunned. I knew I had just declared war, and that I was hopelessly outmatched. Beatrice recovered first, her voice low and cold. She said with a tight smile. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Of course, your grandmother is our honored guest who was simply so moved by gratitude that she volunteered in the kitchen. How quaint! She twisted the story into an insult, a masterful act of cruelty, then swept out of the room with Cynthia. The caterers buried themselves in their work, avoiding my eyes. I turned to my grandmother. Grandma, I'm so sorry, I whispered. I shouldn't have lost my temper. I made it worse. She was calmly rinsing potatoes, her expression peaceful. She turned to me with eyes full of warmth and quiet strength. Nonsense, my dear, she said gently, taking my hand. You didn't make it worse. You made it honest. Some people live on polite cruelty. Sometimes you must be a little impolite to remind them that cruelty isn't grace. She squeezed my hand, then smiled. Now, these potatoes won't peel themselves. Let's get to work. So we did. Instead of rejoining the others, where I knew I'd be whispered about, I stayed. I worked beside my grandmother in silence, our quiet defiance filling the air. We weren't servants, nor guests. We were a team. But elsewhere in the kitchen, a real crisis was unfolding. The head chef, in his crisp uniform and strained expression, was struggling with the dinner's centerpiece, perfectly roasted ducks with an elaborate cherry and port wine reduction. He was talented, but the pressure of cooking under Nathan's aunt's constant scrutiny was too much. The first sign of trouble came when his phone rang. He stepped into the pantry, voice low and anxious. When he returned, his face was pale. Family emergency, he announced to his young sous chef, who looked terrified. My son? I have to go. You can handle the rest, right? Just watch the sauce. Don't let it split. And with that, the head chef hurried out, leaving the young, anxious sous chef to face the chaos alone. The boy, barely 20, tried his best, but his panic was obvious. Then it happened, a brief distraction, and the scent of burning sugar filled the air. The sauce had scorched, a thick black crust forming at the bottom of the pan. With a cry, he dumped the ruined batch into the sink and rushed to start over, his hands trembling. His confidence was gone. He poured in the port wine too quickly, and it refused to reduce. Beatrice and Cynthia sensed disaster and swept into the kitchen, their faces tight with alarm. What's happening here? Beatrice demanded. Where's Chef Antoine? He had to leave, ma'am, the sous chef stammered. Family emergency. And the sauce? Cynthia pressed, glaring into the pot. It looks like purple water. Dinner is in 30 minutes. This is unacceptable. You're ruining my Thanksgiving. They surrounded the poor boy like two perfectly styled hawks, firing questions and criticism until he was near tears. His training seemed to vanish under their relentless pressure. That's when my grandmother Evelyn quietly rose from her prep station. She had been watching everything, calm and observant. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked over, picked up a tasting spoon, and sampled the sauce. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with a look of quiet certainty. Give me that, she said, her tone firm yet steady. You're reducing too fast on high heat. The emulsion's broken. She glanced around and added, and you're using the wrong acid. She pointed toward a stick of butter. That's too soft. It'll ruin the texture. Everyone froze. The sous chef, the aunts, the caterers. They didn't realize they were about to witness a masterclass from the very woman they had dismissed as a helper. My grandmother, in her plain dress and borrowed apron, suddenly commanded the kitchen with complete authority. Beatrice was the first to recover. "And who do you think you are?" she snapped. "This is a professional kitchen. You have no right to interfere." My grandmother didn't even look at her. She addressed the sous chef, her tone gentle but firm, cutting cleanly through the noise. "Breathe," she said. "Turn off the heat. You're scorching the wine before the alcohol burns off. That's why it tastes bitter." The boy instinctively followed her command, lowering the flame. "Good," she continued. Picking up a lemon, she added, "You're trying to fix the cherry's sweetness with more sugar. That never works. Use acid. It balances flavor, not sugar." She nodded toward the butter. "And that needs to chill. If it's warm, it'll melt too fast and break your sauce. Put it in the freezer." "But Chef Antoine said," the boy began. "I respect Chef Antoine's roasting skills," she interrupted calmly. "But his sauce work is a bit ordinary. Now tell me, do you want to serve them roasted duck with watery sweet syrup, or something worth remembering?" The sous chef stared at her, then nodded quickly and began following her instructions. Beatrice and Cynthia stood aside, watching in disbelief as the woman they had insulted took charge of their lavish dinner. What followed was pure mastery. My grandmother moved with the speed and precision of experience. She chopped shallots swiftly, deglazed the pan with a flick of her wrist, and the air filled with the aroma of rich port instead of burnt sugar. She wasn't just cooking, she was orchestrating. She explained each step to the sous chef, who followed eagerly, eyes wide with respect. "See?" she said, whisking in the chilled butter just before finishing. The cold butter emulsifies perfectly, giving the sauce that glossy, velvety finish. The result was stunning, a deep, ruby-red sauce that gleamed like liquid silk. She tasted it, gave a small approving nod, and handed the spoon to the sous chef. "There," she said. "Now you can serve your ducks." He tasted it, and his expression changed instantly, awe replacing fear. "This is incredible," he whispered. "That final butter step, I've only read about it once. It's a classic escoffier method." My grandmother smiled softly. "It is," she said. "My own grandmother taught it to me years ago." The sous chef stared at her, putting the pieces together. He looked at her hands, her posture and the way she moved, and then his eyes widened. "Vance," he breathed. "You're Evelyn Vance, from Vance Catering, the author of Foundations of Flavor?" The kitchen went silent. Beatrice and Cynthia gasped, audibly. The name Vance Catering was legendary in their world, the gold standard of luxury dining for over 30 years, and its founder, the famously private Evelyn Vance, was standing right there, the same woman they had mocked and ordered around. My grandmother simply smiled. "I've been retired for a decade," she said to the stunned sous chef. "But some things you never forget." I glanced at my fiancé's aunts, their faces drained of color, their pride collapsing. They weren't just embarrassed, they were devastated. They had humiliated a guest, a culinary icon in front of witnesses. Their carefully curated reputations were in ruins. Just then, the butler Henderson appeared at the door. "Madam," he said to Beatrice calmly, "the guests are asking when dinner will be served." Beatrice just stared, speechless. She had worried about a ruined meal, but she didn't realize the true disaster had already struck. The silence that followed was profound. Beatrice and Cynthia stood frozen, faces pale, realizing the depth of their mistake. The woman they had belittled was the same Evelyn Vance, whose recipes filled their shelves, unread but displayed for prestige. The irony was complete. They had shamed themselves before the very person they once admired from afar. But my grandmother didn't boast. She turned to the sous chef, her tone steady. "Well," she said, "the guests are waiting. Let's not keep them." With composed authority, she directed the plating for the next 10 minutes. The kitchen moved in perfect rhythm under her guidance, each step efficient and elegant. Beatrice and Cynthia remained in the corner, unable to speak, forced to watch as the woman they had insulted ran their kitchen flawlessly. When the meal was ready, my grandmother removed her apron, smoothed her simple dress, and turned to me with a small twinkle in her eye. "Shall we, dear?" she said softly. We walked back into the dining room, arm in arm, calm and united. Behind us, Beatrice and Cynthia followed slowly, pale and silent, like ghosts returning to face the consequences. The dinner that followed was a masterpiece, rich in flavor and thick with the most exquisite silent tension imaginable. The roasted duck, paired with my grandmother's flawless cherry and port wine reduction, was unlike anything I had ever tasted, and I wasn't the only one who thought so. As soon as the guests took their first bites, the room filled with genuine, unrestrained praise. "Beatrice, this sauce is divine. Truly the best thing your chef has ever made." Beatrice, pale and visibly shaken, pushed her food around the plate and forced a trembling smile. "Yes," she managed weakly. "He's really outdone himself tonight." But my grandfather, Samuel, a man of simple tastes and unshakable honesty, wasn't about to let the falsehood stand. Beaming with unmistakable pride, he announced for all to hear, "Oh, the chef didn't make this. My Evelyn did." She stepped in when there was a little trouble in the kitchen. Every head turned toward my grandmother. Surprise and admiration filled the air. "Evelyn, you made this?" someone asked. And just like that, the evening's focus shifted, from me to my grandmother, and from polite conversation to genuine fascination. Encouraged by my grandfather's delighted prompting, my grandmother began sharing stories from her long and remarkable career. She spoke of catering private dinners for presidents, the chaos of preparing a 5-course royal wedding feast, and her belief that the finest ingredients are always local and seasonal. I sat in awe as the quiet, gentle woman I had always known revealed her true identity. Evelyn Vance, the culinary legend. She wasn't boasting. She was simply sharing her life's passion. The entire table, including my fiancé's father and his business partners, listened with admiration. Beatrice and Cynthia had no choice but to sit silently at their own table, forced to listen as the woman they had belittled became the undeniable star of their event. Every story from my grandmother was a reminder of their arrogance, and every word of praise was a fresh sting of humiliation. The final, elegant moment came when the young sous chef entered to clear the dishes. He paused, standing tall, with renewed confidence. "Mrs. Prescott," he said with genuine respect, not to Beatrice, but to my grandmother. "On behalf of the entire kitchen staff, thank you. It was an honor to cook with you tonight. I've learned more in the past hour than in 2 years of culinary school." Then he turned to me. "And thank you, Amelia. Your grandmother is a legend, but it's clear you share her gift. If you hadn't noticed the spoiled wine near the oven, I'd never have solved the issue with the sauce. You saved us from disaster." The table fell silent as everyone looked at me with a new kind of respect. The quiet girl wasn't so simple after all. My fiancé, Nathan, had been watching everything unfold, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. Finally, he stood, raising his glass. "I think," he said quietly, "that I've been a complete fool. I've been worried about all the wrong things." He looked at my grandmother, then back at me. "And I have a lot to apologize for." He lifted his glass again. "To Amelia," he said with deep sincerity, "and to her remarkable family." The toast hung in the air, a simple but powerful declaration. It wasn't just an apology. It was a public realignment of loyalty. In that moment, Nathan chose us. The shock on his aunts' faces was unmistakable. They had lost control, and they knew it. The rest of the evening was a quiet display of poetic justice. My grandmother's duck, saved from ruin, was a triumph. Compliments filled the room, but not one of them was directed at the hostesses. They all went to my grandmother. "Evelyn," Nathan's father boomed from across the table, "This is the best duck I've ever eaten. You must share the recipe." My grandmother smiled modestly. "Oh, I couldn't possibly. It's an old family secret." My grandfather glowed with pride, urging her to share more stories from her career, tales that Beatrice and Cynthia had likely heard whispered about for years, but never believed. Now they had to sit in silence as the truth unfolded before their guests. Their perfect Thanksgiving, meant to showcase their status, had been completely overtaken by the very people they had looked down upon. The departure that night was formal and subdued. Gone was the earlier cheer, replaced by stiff politeness. In the grand foyer, the aunts could barely meet our eyes. Their quiet goodbyes carried the weight of defeat. The car ride home began in silence. Then Nathan reached for my hand. "Amelia," he said softly, emotion thick in his voice. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, dear," my grandmother said gently. But Nathan shook his head. "It is. I knew what they were like. I was so afraid of their judgment that I let them treat you and your family unfairly. Tonight I saw what real class and strength look like. And it's not about money or appearances. It's about you. It's your family." His words were the most heartfelt apology I'd ever received. In the weeks that followed, the story of that Thanksgiving spread through their social circle. The tale of Evelyn Vance being mistaken for kitchen staff by her own hosts became infamous. Beatrice and Cynthia's reputation as sophisticated tastemakers was replaced by one of arrogance and folly. A few months later, Nathan came to me with a new idea. He was done with his family's empty world of finance and status. He wanted to build something genuine. Using part of his trust fund, he proposed opening a small family-run bistro named Evelyn's Table. My grandmother would be the consulting chef, and I would run it with him. Our vindication didn't come through revenge, but through creation, turning humiliation into purpose. A year later, on the night of Evelyn's Table's grand opening, the space was warm, bright, and alive with the aroma of my grandmother's cooking. My grandfather welcomed guests at the door. My grandmother commanded the kitchen with quiet authority, and Nathan stood behind the bar, fulfilled and content. And I was running the show, proud owner, happy partner, and grateful granddaughter. Beatrice and Cynthia were not invited. As I looked around our thriving restaurant, I realized the truth. The very kitchen help they had mocked was now the foundation of our greatest joy and success. Our triumph wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving that authenticity, kindness, and hard work endure longer than pretension or pride. A truly heartwarming reminder that real class is built on character, not appearances. What did you think of how Evelyn handled everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this uplifting story of quiet vindication, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.